Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel on Cynicalex. And before you ask, yes, I did in fact put LED lights around my framed Silver Surfer. Gorgeous artwork. I absolutely love this piece, and now it looks even more cool and even more nerdy, just the way I like it. Now, what are we doing here today on the channel? Well, obviously you see the tier maker to my right, my left. We're making a ranking of the best PvP characters in Marvel Future Fight for Timeline Battle. It's a little bit specific. It's a little bit niche, I know, but I've made enough PvP videos. I've highlighted the value of certain PvP characters, and so I want to get into a little bit more depth and give you guys more information. And also, these are just really fun to make, and I love these tier maker lists. So yeah, let's get into it. Now, for this one, very complicated, okay? We've got 7 categories, so many different colors here. And I'm hiding, well, here's the characters, but I'm hiding the rankings. But we're going to start at the top, as we normally do. Actually, you know what? Let's start at the bottom and work our way up. Okay, so we're going to start with Trash Rotation. This is very straightforward, and these are basically characters who could be good in Timeline Battle, but are not because they have a trash rotation. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, and obviously this is just my own opinion. PvP, more so than PvE in Marvel Future Fight, tends to have a lot of really passionate fans. And so there are people who are, you know, really advocating for the value of Invisible Woman in PvP or Silver Surfer still in 2022 or whatever. You're welcome to build whoever you like, but this is just my opinion. So firmly in the trash rotation category, we have both Icarus and Drax. And again, this is not an exhaustive list. There are definitely other characters that fit this bill, but Drax and Icarus just highlight this so well, where they have the tools you need to win, but they just don't do it on auto. By the way, for those of you wondering, trash rotation, Alex, just play manually. No, this ranking that I'm going to be giving you is for autoplay only. Once you introduce manual play, especially since you're playing against an AI opponent, you're not playing against a live opponent, it just takes a lot of RNG out. It just takes a lot of things out. Like, you can frankly just walk away. Right, you can just take your character's joystick and walk away and dodge like 50% of any character's attacks. So it really throws a monkey wrench into things when we start comparing characters on manual play, and then, like, you know, I can play the character better on manual than you can, or, you know, like, it just gets into the weeds. So just to be fair, just to be straight, and just, you know, just to be as consistent as possible, everything is going to be gauged on auto play only. So yeah, these two definitely need to be highlighted for trash rotations. I'm still, fingers crossed, hoping that Marvel Future Fight devs will fix them, but in the meantime, we will move on to the next category, the almost good category. Now, these characters, for one reason or another, are just not quite there yet, but if they got an extra buff, if something happens in the future, if they get an extra passive support or something, they could once again rise to popularity and sort of pseudo-dominance. None of these characters were ever super dominant in PvP, but they all had sort of flashes of brilliance at one point or another. Yelena probably being the strongest one at the time, but I'm sort of ranking them in terms of their value right now. So keep that in mind. I am ranking them from best to worst within this category, so honestly, I should probably do that. Also, Thane shouldn't be on this list at all, but I'm going to put him here. It's kind of a mistake. It's kind of not a mistake. Listen, Thane was really good for a tier 2 character when he came out. Like, he was unreasonably good. He didn't have, you know, there was no reason for him to be as good as he was. And if Thane gets a uniform, like a Phoenix Force uniform, and gets a tier 3, he could honestly be scary good. Scary good. He's a very strong, he might be the best tier 2 PvP character for Alliance Conquest. He's very good. So yeah, now we move on to one of the most popular categories, the old meta. And yes, there will be people in the comments claiming that this is the new meta, and that I'm wrong, and that I'm dumb, and, you know, etc. But yes, these characters were once gods in Marvel Future Fight. They were once dominating PvP from left to right, and now they're just not anymore. You can still win with them. I'm not saying you can't win with the old meta. There is still value in these characters, but they're not going to consistently give you wins on auto the way that they used to. And Quicksilver probably had Quicksilver and Blue Marvel probably had the shortest time here in that sort of bracket of meta. But I still think they deserve to be mentioned. Also, Quicksilver and Black Widow specifically should be mentioned as still capable of tormenting, and Yelena actually. All three of these are still capable of tormenting enemies in PvP if the enemy doesn't have iframe ignore. So if your enemy, like, you know, if you're fighting against someone that doesn't have iframe ignore, these characters can do work because they can just cycle through iframes and iframe ignore skills, and they can just slowly whittle them down. And that's exactly what Black Widow did to Jean Grey circa 2020. Yeah, it's been almost 2 years now, guys. Time does really fly. Moving on to the next category, now we're getting into, in my opinion, legitimately good timeline battle PvP characters. I wouldn't say you shouldn't invest in any of these characters for PvP, but I would say any characters you invest in from green up for timeline battle, you are going to get a very good return on your investment. Now, some of them will have a little bit more support necessary, and I'll sort of explain as we go along, but the first one we got to highlight here is the Defenders team. Still so good, and I'm just waiting for a few more days to pass before I can make a follow-up Defenders video, because I made one when they came out and they were amazing. 6 months later, I made a video saying 6 months later, they're still so good, that the God Killers, and I honestly think they might still be the God Killers, you know, of old. Not as, you know, not top dogs anymore, but still very, very good and able to hold it down. Also, Mephisto is surprisingly good for PvP, especially with so many combat types running around, but it's just no one builds him for PvP. So I do think he's a bit underrated. This is kind of like the amazing / underrated category. I definitely think you could also just call this underrated, because I do think these teams, while they may not be as consistent as other teams, I do think they're still very, very good. You got Shang-Chi there, and then you've also got Supergiant, very underrated for 1v1 PvP, with, you know, healing, lots of different debuffs with paralysis and silence and mind control, and then that crazy third skill, iframe ignore, super duper long, damage reduction, invisibility, and then if you can't kill her in 30 seconds, she pops the awakening skill, and bodies hit the ground. Now, coming up here with B, we have the support meta. Unlike PvE, support characters really have a much larger role to play in PvP, because the effects that they can provide can dramatically shift the balance of power, right? You can bring in characters from these categories, these lower categories, but if you use characters to support them in the meta, and you pick on characters that are weak to those support buffs up here, you can punch up. So it really is the best way to punch up and sort of get an advantage over your opponent when you take advantage of these types of support. So Molecule Man is the king of supports. Okay, there's a reason for that, because he nullifies all of the other supports that I'm about to rank besides one. So that is very important to note. Hela is a very good standalone character, but she requires her artifact, so I do think she's best classified as a support type. She's not as good as Wolverine one-on-one, even though she has the same artifact, but I still think she can get you some kills, but I wouldn't rank her any higher than this, just because of the fact there are just better options if you're going to go that route. But then we also have Ebony, and then we have Colossus. Colossus is honestly slipping, but yeah, any buffs, any sort of buffs that increase your damage or decrease your damage to heroes or villains, Molecule Man just takes that and deletes it. So for that reason, he will always have a place at the very front of the table for support meta. And he basically invalidates Hela, he invalidates Colossus, he invalidates some of Spidey's buffs, he invalidates some of Cersei's buffs, he invalidates so many hero and villain buffs, and only Ebony to this day is really a good alternative and a good sort of counter to a Molecule Man-led universal PvP team. Yeah, and they're still good. They're still very, very good teams, and you can still get a ton of wins with them despite Molecule Man being pretty squishy. So that does it for the sort of, you know, B to Z tier teams, right? You got like the really bad ones down here, and that in my opinion are just sort of disappointing. But again, still meta, but just disappointing. All the way up to very frequently featured in the top 100 teams. Like, I guarantee you at least one of these characters is in all 100 teams, or 95% of the teams in the top 100 for Vibranium. So what comes next? Well, first we have the Artifact Gods. Now, I put these characters here. I have to separate these characters because although they are amazing in PvP, amazing in timeline battle, one-on-one scenarios, they heavily rely on the existence and the presence of their own artifact. And it sort of is night and day with these characters, depending on whether you have their artifact or you do not. So we're going to start off with Wolverine. With his artifact, he is you know, possibly one of the scariest characters to face in PvP, because even when you get him down to 1 HP, he doesn't die, so you don't get any breathing room. He can continue to charge his tier 3, and he can continue to pop off his counterattacks. And unlike every other character, Null included, Wolverine has that insane passive healing. So by the time his artifact is done and the cooldown begins, he's back up to 100%. So he basically has a 100% revive with no breathing room for the enemy, right? You don't get time to stall, you don't get time to reset your cooldowns on your skills, which makes him so strong, in addition to having, you know, iframe ignore, counter, really high burst damage, really good residual damage, lots of iframes, damage reduction, you know, elemental damage, bleed. He's basically got it all. Cersei and Gilgamesh, same sort of thing here. Cersei would fall dramatically if she did not have her revive passive. With her revive passive, considering she's a transcended character, she becomes a ticking time bomb. You can kill her, and then she's just going to respawn and kill you. That's basically how it goes. She always trades at least 1 for 1, if not more. And then Gilgamesh, we all know, he's very good without his artifact, but he becomes an absolute tank. Like tank god with his artifact, with that insane HP. And also, they sort of synergize with each other. So if you take one away, it does sort of drop the value of the other, and vice versa, because he gives her a bunch of defensive buffs and guard break and stuff, and she gives him the debuff immunity and the extra attack and the extra damage versus villains. So then that leaves us with 5 characters left. And of course, you can guess what this S tier should be known as. This is the, I can't spell. This is the I cannot type. These are the autoplay gods, and these characters are basically the best characters for PvP in the game. Now, this is going to be a little bit controversial, so we'll take it slow. Sentry was the best. Oh, you guys can't really see this. Sentry was the best autoplay god for a long time. And then along came Doctor Doom and basically pooped in Sentry's cereal. And then for a long time, Doctor Doom was the best auto PvP character. And then Spider-Man came around and he poops on Sentry, and he sort of poops on Doom. Here's where it gets kind of dicey here. Although Spider-Man does counter Doom very well, he doesn't counter the rest of the meta that well, right? He's obviously going to struggle a lot against combat types, and he can even lose to, you know, Hellas and Cersei's and stuff like that because of lots of buffs against heroes, or because of revive nukes and things like that, right? So Doom actually, like, although Spidey counters Doom, we're not looking at an individual, right? This is not a ranking of how Spidey does versus Doom. This is a ranking of how Spidey compares to everyone else in the meta. And so that's where he kind of stays. And then Emma Frost came out, and Emma Frost was like, hey, I'm sort of like Spidey, except I'm a blast type. And she also poops on Doom, but then she gets pooped on by Spider-Man. There's lots of pooping. It's like a dog park. Anywho, this is where she lands. Yes, this is honestly what I think. And now, most recently, we have Adam Warlock. And obviously, he's down here. No, just kidding. But seriously, Adam Warlock, in my opinion, should be somewhere around here. It's very difficult at the moment. It's still too early to say definitively. So I think you can sort of take your pick here. I think Adam Warlock is going to be more consistent than Doom versus the rest of the meta, because he's not going to have the drawback versus combat types, and he's still only going to have the same weakness that Doom has, which is a really well-built Spider-Man tormenting the both of them. On the flip side, he doesn't have any of those other cons, and he doesn't fall to any of the other traps versus villains and things like that. Basically, only Hela and Spider-Man give Adam Warlock a really hard time. So this is honestly where I think it shakes out. And I'll be very interested to hear from the community and hear your reactions and your feedback to this. But I think that this is, and so remember, these are ranked. They're ranked top to bottom, and they're also ranked left to right. So I do think he's the #1 PvP timeline character for autoplay. I think he's number 2, he's number 3, she's number 4, he's number 5. And then I would say he's number 6, he's number 7, he's number 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Well, it's not quite 9, 10, 11, 12, but you sort of get what I'm saying. As far as the rankings go and as far as the value of these characters go. But it's not an exhaustive list. You can definitely still use other characters. You know, some notable mentions that were left off this list. Corvus, possibly Thanos if he gets a uniform, crossing my fingers. Possibly Infinity Ultron if he gets a uniform, crossing my fingers. Some people can make it work with, like, Null, for example. You know, Destroyer makes an appearance now and then in PvP teams. So the really good thing about MFF, the best thing about PvP and MFF is that it's getting more and more diverse. And a list like this is harder and harder to make as the updates go on. That is excellent. I know it's hard for players who want to keep up because they got to shell out the cash and they got to buy crystals to keep up. But on the other hand, it's really fun. I cannot tell you how absolutely, you know, snooze-inducing, how boring, how sleepy the meta was 2 years ago, where just a couple of characters dominated and you just saw them day in and day out, and just every refresh was just like, is my screen frozen? The name's changing, but the team is exactly the same. Nowadays, you see so much variety. I absolutely love it, and I want it to continue. So yeah, hit me up in the comments down below. Let me know your opinions on the timeline battle autoplay meta. Thank you so much for watching. Smash the like button if you enjoyed the content, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.